So, thank you for joining us today for this interview, Mr. Evans. Oh, thanks for having me, Mr. Evans. So, what is the subject matter for this theme of work? So, the subject matter for this work focuses on the idea of Kirkgate Market and Victoria Gate versus each other. It's kind of a battle over the gentrification of Leeds and how I feel personally as an artist that it's being kind of the real pride of Leeds is being almost suppressed by what the council is doing with Victoria Gate especially, and it's stripping away kind of the soul and the kind of dirt and grit that Leeds has and kind of turning it into something it's not. It's like almost plastification for me. It's about like how everything should be so bright and pretty, but it's not true to what I feel Leeds is really about. So why did you choose this subject matter for this theme of work? I think this subject matter really spoke to me personally because it also represents like an internal struggle I have with my family coming from like 2 generations ago in my grandparents and my grandparents' parents being kind of more working class, and then over time my family developing more towards middle class, and it's kind of representing that the kind of working class ethos in my family is still everyone in my family works super hard. Like both my grandparents on my dad's side work, my parents are both working now, and they work like 13-14 hour days. So it was kind of a mix of me seeing what I could in Leeds and then identifying that something personal. So it's a personal matter, but it's also a way of me on commenting what's happening as a whole in Leeds itself, but it's also like self-commentary as well. It's interesting to relate this to kind of famous artists' work such as Grayson Perry's tapestries, which I think personally they come from a very kind of same perspective as I'm viewing the work now, and how there's a contrasting difference between the childhood and adolescence, but it's like telling the same story. So it's interesting that it's also another subject matter that artists have explored as well as myself. Do you think your background has affected this theme of work? Like I said before, it's actually really personal, this kind of subject matter, that I don't think these kind of working class kind of hubs should be really paved over like they're being in Leeds at the moment. I feel like Leeds is kind of losing its pride in kind of the old established, apart from places like City Hall and kind of Leeds City Museum, and kind of going in this new modern direction more, which I don't think really captures what Leeds as a whole is all about, Do you think this work has been particularly influenced by any other artists at all? There has been quite a lot of artist influence in this work, and then they influence the work in all different sorts of ways. So we have Barbara Kruger kind of more focusing that on not her visually, but more kind of her work in a conflict kind of sense. I think you really start to see the Barbara Kruger influence when you look at how the piece is then composed, how you have these kind of 2 almost like machine-like beings kind of fighting off and dueling with each other, and that's really what kind of links my work, I think, to Barbara Kruger's, is this idea of conflict being involved in the piece. And then Nick Salick is someone that I've really focused on visually, because he takes these kind of architectural forms, like the brutalist forms that I've seen a lot around Leeds, especially doing the kind of Kirkgate markets. I think by also first taking these pictures from a photographic standpoint and then removing them so there is no background or colour in them apart from the ones added by the risograph process, it's quite effective because it makes you focus in. It doesn't muddy the water, or it doesn't these kind of shapes have no context to them. There's no background at all. So it really draws the viewer's attention into the piece, and focusing that and then extracting that, like I've done with the patterns and the GIFs and the kind of end video, and then putting that into a more gallery setting, which I think is really important and key and kind of visually exciting, to remove these things from their initial environment and really kind of explore them in a gallery setting. Because the piece is so abstract, that it's actually more suited to a more middle class audience, which is interesting, I think. So even though I have this link to the working class, I actually don't think it's that well suited, and I see it more in a gallery space, kind of as a more private installation as well. Maybe a large screen kind of format, but then with headphones, so it's almost like a one-on-one viewership. So, but then it becomes a personal thing for the viewer of the piece as well as myself. So it's kind of linking that personal aspect in with the film itself. This idea of using headphones, I think it links to the piece itself, because to hear kind of some of the sound effects more clearly actually lends itself better to headphones, and I kind of mixed it, especially with those low subs building towards the end of the piece. I think it actually would enhance the experience of the piece on a whole more if it was experienced with headphones. And why did these artists have such a particular effect on this work? For me, I've already kind of answered the Barbara Kruger aspect with her, like, more of a conflict approach to her work and bringing conflict kind of and opening it up and saying about it, and then Nick Selleck as well. But for me, Marcel Breuer has this quote that really kind of stuck with me, and it's the smallest detail can be as important as the whole structure itself. And I think that's really what I focused on, is kind of these small visual differences in these places that might be overlooked, but actually how sometimes they're really linked and how sometimes they're quite different. And I think that's kind of represented in the work itself, how you have these structures kind of interacting and then moving apart. So it's almost saying about the kind of differences and similarities in some of these places that I think is important as well. Out of all the places in Leeds to choose, why did you choose Victoria Gate versus Kirkgate Market? I think for me personally, like, Kirkgate Market was really important when I first came to Leeds as a city. It's a really kind of place that I connected with and felt very kind of integrated in Leeds as a society, and then there's like a really interesting road in Leeds where it splits kind of deliberately, almost it seems like a kind of barrier in between these two things. On one side you have the gentrified kind of area of Victoria Gate, and on the other side you have what the Victorians kind of did to gentrify Leeds back in the day, and kind of with that old Victorian facade at the front of Kirkgate Market. So it's kind of interesting to see how, like, a few hundred years the gentrification aspect has changed and kind of, you know, adapted to see what the middle class then wanted and what the middle class now wants, and kind of how what used to be really shiny and kind of amazing and impactful in the Victorian era is now kind of being overshadowed by this modern kind of facade, this modern kind of architecture of Leeds. Were there any challenges in shooting in either of these locations at all? For me, the challenges was kind of like about getting up close enough to the work and the patterns without kind of being really too like intrusive or like kind of in the way of like just, so kind of going more undercover than I normally would, and kind of getting these pictures. Is actually funny, when in Victoria Gate I was actually asked to stop taking photographs, which is interesting to me. For some reason they didn't like the fact I was just kind of hanging around taking photographs, whereas Kirkgate Market, that really wasn't brought up at all. What is your opinion on the gentrification of Leeds? I've touched on it a little bit before, but I think the gentrification of Leeds is actually kind of a scary thing, and it's kind of had two stages to it really, with Kirkgate Market going through it in the 70s and the addition of that kind of back section of it that kind of appears like it's like a glorified cattle shed at some points. But it's for me it's kind of important that we keep comment to it, and I think that was kind of attempted again in the 70s and 80s with this kind of Leeds architecture style, which you can see the Yorkshire Playhouse is kind of done in the style of this kind of faux kind of Leeds brickwork with a kind of coloured plastic in it, and I don't think, for me personally, it really pulled it off. But I don't think the way that kind of the shiny kind of glitz and glam kind of the Victoria Gate and the kind of casino and that kind of link to it doesn't really fit with me personally in my view of Leeds, and I know it doesn't fit like with a lot of people on the more of the Kirkgate side of it. And I think, yeah, it's important to gentrify, obviously, to bring these places new so they don't get run down and forgotten, but it's also important kind of not to forget what Leeds is, and I think that's what's happened really well with the Corn Exchanges. How it's, yes, it's been adapted and it's modernised and kind of hipsterised in a way, and whereas but it's not done, it still celebrates the building, and there's still history there. It's not, Victoria Gate kind of paved over the old police station and the old brutalist structure there, and it's kind of left that all behind. It doesn't make comment to that anyway. Maybe in the brickwork, but it's kind of, again, done in a way to make it look elaborate and grand. Again, just to reference my own work relating to this idea of over-gentrification, I think that really comes through with the black overlay of on top of the risograph prints themselves. It really adds that kind of idea of adding on top of and adding on top of again and again. Through overprinting it, kind of, you get I was going for the same kind of feel that Leeds is kind of going through, this kind of always re-facading, if you will. Finally, have you thought about expanding this project at all to include other cities around the UK? Me, I think it's a project that definitely could only be expanded in Leeds itself. It can be expanded nationwide. I think gentrification is really affecting areas like Sheffield, Manchester, but also cities down by where I used to live at my parents' house in Birmingham, and even Worcester to a certain extent is getting a new kind of, is getting this new shopping centre, and it's all kind of being done up, and it's like the history of Worcester and with that link to the Civil War is kind of going away, and the same with Birmingham with the Boring and kind of areas like Digbeth and stuff like that. That's kind of, apart from the Custer factory, it's again, it's this hipsterisation of kind of areas and this kind of glamourifying of other areas as well. And it's like meaning that lots of money is focused into certain sections of the city, whereas other parts are being, and other communities are being forgotten about. So I definitely think it can be expanded much broader than just Leeds and just Kirkgate Market, Victoria Gate itself. Well, Mr. Evans, I think that's all the questions I had for you today. Thank you for your time.